Welcome back to the Speaking and Communicating podcast. I am your host, Roberta. If you are looking to improve your communication skills, both professionally and personally, this is the podcast you should be tuning into. And by the end of this episode, please remember to give a rating and a review and subscribe to this podcast. Today, I have the privilege of being joined by Bobby Dorlus, who goes by Bobby D. He is an engineer and a motivational speaker. And as you know, in this podcast, we do combine engineering with soft skills. So he is the perfect fit for today's episode, especially. Before I go any further, please help me welcome him to the podcast. Hi, Bobby D.
Hey, Roberta, thank you so much for inviting me. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm so excited for your audience to hear my story and definitely looking forward to the opportunity to talk about soft skills and how that made me so effective as an engineer.
I'm so excited that you're here. When I reached out to you, I was like, yeah, I really need to talk to this guy.
No doubt, no doubt.
Yeah, so give us a little bit background about you before we get to the work part.
Definitely, definitely. So, as mentioned, my name is Bobby Dorlus. My friends call me Bobby D. I've been in engineering and technology for about 20 years now. I'm an engineer, motivational speaker. And actually, I was telling Roberta that I wanted to kind of redefine what type of engineering I am. I'm more or less like a conscious engineer of the internet, where I'm really conscious of who I am, my diverse background, and how that associates with engineering. Most recently, I worked at a really cool company. Some of you might know it. It's a social media company. It's the little blue bird one. You know that one? It's called
Oh,
Twitter.
that's right.
Yeah, so I worked there for about 9 years as a site reliability engineer. Now, that engineering skill set requires you to be a software engineer, but also have other skill sets such as systems engineering, which is where I'm most proficient at. I basically worked on building cloud infrastructure. So whenever you hear the word cloud, I was one of those
Mhm.
engineers that was actually building those infrastructures for Twitter and basically making sure that it's accessible around the world at light speed, more or less, 200 milliseconds or less. My background is really in systems engineering. I was talking about this a little bit earlier in terms of just my education wise. I only went to 2 years technical school and then got certifications. So I don't have a 4 year degree, but I've also been doing it for 20 years where I started off, let's say, all the way at the help desk and eventually being able to ascend to a staff level engineering position at Twitter. So if I can do it is more or less one of my punchlines. If I can do it, you can do it. And thank you for the opportunity again for me to chat up with your audience.
That is an amazing story. And especially because, okay, firstly, I had a guest on this podcast. Her book title is Dump Your Degree. Now, this is someone with a PhD, but she's basically saying in this culture, let's reevaluate how our previous thought process of you have to have the 4 year degree and the master's and the PhD, if it's a must for everything. Like you said, 2 years and then you were one of the top engineers at Twitter.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that I always get a chance to remind students and mentees that I have is that this specific skill set, engineering, 90% of it you can learn online. Now that 1% is more or less you actually getting your hands dirty and actually testing it out. But majority of the things I work on, if you didn't know, this is also kind of like talking about history. The internet was created, or the World Wide Web was for information to be accessible, not just for Twitter, Facebook, and so on and so forth. But if you
Mhm.
look at what we have now, with the type of a finger or even voice, I can find the answer to most any questions. Now, apply that to engineering. I guarantee you can design and create anything that your imaginations can come up with, but you just got to use the tools right. And that's the internet itself as a place where information that you can gain any knowledge that you want, especially in the field of engineering and technology.
So, if you want to be in engineering and technology like you are, is it important that you are proficient in math and science, or you can just go to YouTube and start programming, going Python on a video and saying, okay, I can do this, I can duplicate what they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on where your passion is, right? If somebody's really passionate about learning and figuring things out, then I wouldn't say those skill sets are needed. But for somebody that's really looking at math and science as something that's really foundational to you, because I've always loved math and science, engineering was an easy transition for me because I started off thinking I was going to be a mathematician and be an algebra teacher. And then I found out that the same way that you do algebra formulas, like solving them, is the same
Mhm.
thing that I'm doing writing code. I'm basically writing a formula in English And basically, I'm solving an algorithm or creating a function to solve a problem. That connection that I made, it made engineering like my number one choice, especially because I had a passion for science, math, and engineering and technology. Anything with computers, anything with moving parts, I've always wanted to know how they work. And it can really make you or help you propel you in this field of engineering, but it shouldn't limit you if that's not your per se. Like if you're not really into it, you can still learn as long as you have the passion and the drive to really push through.
Right. Speaking of which, when I think of, I remember there's an Oprah episode I watched many years ago. Obviously, I don't remember a lot of them, but this one stood out to me. This kid he was around 12. This boy, he said he was able to access people's credit cards on the internet. Now, one, scary, but more than anything, I thought to myself, where would he have learned that skill? Because I don't think his school by the age of 12 had the computers even to even teach him that. So how was he able to access so much programming and hacking and whatever you call it for him at 12 years old to be able to read people's credit cards? I hope he didn't commit crimes. But if back then, because Oprah has been done for a while, for many years, if back then he could access that type of information on the internet, where would he have gotten that from? And obviously by now, everything is out there.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually a really good example of like the type of rigor you need to put in your research and finding out how things work. So if I'm just thinking about Oprah, obviously that's like 80s, 90s, early 2000s, maybe later than that. But in general, what we had when I first started is communities that you could actually join online. They're more common now, like group chats and things like WhatsApp and those things for you to be able to communicate with anybody in the world. But when I first started getting in computers, there was something called IRC chat rooms. They still have them around, but they are really old school chatting systems where you can find out information like that. You join a community and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, and you're doing it all anonymous because they don't really know who you are. I guarantee you, him or her moving on the internet at the age of 12, nobody knew that was a person at the age of 12. It just depends on how active you are, how interested you're in a topic. And then before you know it, you'll learn something. And then you take that and you might be able to find out about credit cards or use it for something else and make something good. But in general, it's really community-based learning, using the resources we had during those times. That's like going to the library, reading source code, like actually really getting into the deep systems engineering or software engineering. And then before you know it, you start to pick up skills. And what really possibly happened, and I don't know about the story, is that there may have been a vulnerability that he or she found out, and the credit card company never closed that vulnerability. And guess what? It's a wide open door that anybody could walk in. So those are the different ways that hackers or engineers like myself design systems to block hackers, always making sure that we're always up to date on our software packages and vulnerabilities. Because if you leave that door open, a 12-year-old could walk in.
Bobby D, please protect the rest of us.
I try.
When you talk about searching for information, you remind me of the movie Hidden Figures, the characters, the one played by Octavia Spencer. I remember it wasn't her job, but she was the one who went to the library to find out how that computer, remember the computer systems that weren't working anymore, and she was able to figure them out. Yes.
Definitely. And I tell you, that's kind of where, in terms of technologists that have been in the industry for a while, that was our source. That was our internet. That was where we went to Google things, was to the library and read Fortran's, manual and learn how the software program works or the programming language works. But nowadays, you don't need to go to the library to do that. I can type in Fortran right now and, pull up the same book that she was looking for. But truly, that's kind of the hunger and drive that I'm talking about that we needed during those times to get into this field. Now that's less tension and friction for anyone interested in getting in the field now because we have something called the internet. But those that have been around, we understand what it means to put in the work to research and understand what all this stuff is doing.
Right. So you've been there from the beginning, deep in the trenches.
Deep in the trenches.
Right. You mentioned you have mentees. So are you mentoring the young people to come up and be engineers like you one day?
Yeah, so that's like really where my passion has moved over the years is number one, not seeing enough people like me in the industry. Number two, not hearing enough stories like mine's that could help influence the next generation. So one of the first things that I've done establishing this new brand called the Tech Hustle is offering coaching and mentoring and partnering up with any other, Fortune 500, Fortune 500, nonprofit organization. I'm sorry, nonprofit organizations that are really focusing on teaching, interviewing, and just more or less having a platform for me to get this message out as much as possible. And that's when I've been able to build up a new, a group of followers in the sense of mentees and students that really enjoy my conversation and the knowledge that I have been given them.
That's wonderful. Especially, like I said, it's very important to see that there's somebody who could do this, and college is not the only option, as we've discussed before, and that this can be done. And I think they can start at any age, right? They don't have to wait until they finish high school.
Any age. I mean, it's even as easy as starting to leverage something called open source. I'm not sure if your audience or you are familiar with open source, but the idea is that programs nowadays are all written in public. So that means that I can go and find out how it really works. And not only just find out, but I can help support it and or make upgrades to it. So if you want to, and this is something I tell my mentees, if you want to play as an engineer, there's a platform out there called GitHub that you can check out code and play like an engineer. That's what we do all day when we're designing systems, is checking out code, upgrading, designing, adding new features, and then submitting it for someone to approve it. That same process is the same things you can develop right now, and you don't need a college degree to go and create a GitHub account and or submit code that some companies like Twitter, Facebook, and Google all use. And another side effect of that is we've actually hired people from them submitting code. So if you're trying to get a job, submit some open source code. You never know who's looking. You didn't even have to apply for the job. They came knocking. So that's something that I also teach and let mentees and students know.
Right. Yeah. So they can start at any time. And like, as we said earlier, be hungry for information.
Roger that.
Yeah. Let's talk about the fun part of Twitter.
All right. What's up?
So when I saw your profile, it said something about, I know all the, okay, you didn't, not verbatim, but you said something along the lines of, I've got the scoop on Twitter. I was there for 9 years. You want to give us the scoop? Anything that's not on the NDA is not going to get you in trouble.
Oh, no, never that, never that. Actually, I have a little punchline when I talk to potential clients. They say, why me? I tell them, because I'm the ex-engineer you know about, but you just haven't met yet. Mm-hmm. And what it really just comes down to is that my journey at Twitter has been by far the best job I've ever had. And it really just comes down to just the experience that I have working with peers in an organization, a company that really leaned on me being myself and me just not trying to put up a front on day one and or whenever I decided to leave, but always being myself. And really that space itself has allowed me to become a high performer, high proficient engineer. And I love the experience that they gave me at Twitter. And I want the world to also start to develop those same mindsets so that our community can be lifted up and really engage with their skill sets as engineers if they work in an environment as such. But, Twitter's politics, Twitter's ups and downs. I mean, there's not that much that I can shy away from it, other than saying that the culture at Twitter really leans on understanding the value of its employees. We are the voice, and we are the ones that are really doing most of the work, right? Mm-hmm. And once you start to have management change that don't align with that, that's when you really start to get some friction. Unfortunately, I think with the new possibilities in terms of acquisitions, there may be some change in culture. But what I experienced from my time there, I tell you, is the best job that I've had. And I truly want to make sure that I work towards changing the industry so they can adopt those different practices and principles.
Mm-hmm. I usually have what I call a love-hate relationship with social media, because I can see the good that it does, but I can also be critical enough of some of what I think is harming us in a way. For instance, how we've become so obsessed with what other people think, or how we no longer have conflict resolution skills. We just troll on our keyboards. I understand from the behind the scenes, you were wonderful and you did great work and you love your company because you work for it. But what's your take on the impact of social media to us as a civilization?
Yeah, I mean, It's no doubt that social media has changed the way that we communicate. Like it's like you check social media before you even check the news, right? And that right there for me was the switch that kind of was like, wow, the platform Twitter or any other ones that are out there needs to be mindful of the impact that it's going to have to society, such as misinformation, a louder voice, louder than the truth itself. And unfortunately, we are continuing to iterate and coming up with ways to make that experience better. I, on the personal side of the house, have really not felt like all the social media companies, including Twitter, has done enough, especially when it comes to youngsters, young people on the internet, and also just understanding the impact that it has to their long-term adulthood, right? It's like once you start to develop these habits, these same habits are going to carry over into adulthood, such as only using social media to communicate with people, or unfortunately, the side effect of that, especially for younger boys and girls, is like someone that they're always comparing themselves against. And then once you're not able to meet that, you think you're less than. So those type of things, I think social media across the board needs to become more aware of and really just find a way to make it receptible to the audience that is old enough to receive it, but also not blocking it, but making it restrictive in a way that youngsters are able to develop their minds and understand what's going on before they get caught up in, some crazy stuff that they've seen on the internet. I mean, it's really tough, and it's a tough concept to really enforce, because number one, you have profits, you have stockholders, you have this, you have that, and then you also have like the social impact and the changes that it had on society. And overall, I'm just hoping over time that there's more governance around it. And I'm not just in different states, countries. I mean, like global type of governance that allows everybody to understand the value of social media, but also the impact of it. So I don't have an answer, but I definitely know that it's a conversation that we will continue to have. It's a conversation I always spoke loud at while I worked there at Twitter, because I got two young ones myself. And I'm like, yo, can I get a Twitter account? No, you can't get a Twitter account yet.
You're too young, age restriction.
Right. And in general, if I'm a parent and I feel that way, then obviously I want to stand by that and making sure that the company is aware of my opinion about it. But it will take time. It's a continued iteration. And I think once we start to break financial gains with what social media does, then we'll be able to have the right society, like, decisions making on that. Because living in a capitalist world, unfortunately, the dollar talks a lot louder than a young pick-me or someone that's not ready to speak for themselves.
Yeah, it's all about the bottom line.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Hello, capitalism. You spoke about communication, and I know that you're a motivational speaker. How imperative or how critical is communication when it comes to the engineering sector, based on experience, especially?
Yeah, so I was always kind of considered like a unicorn in this industry. First of all, being someone of minority background, and obviously you don't see that many people that look like me in the field. I've always been considered that, but the unicornness that they always kind of like highlight is my ability to speak and effectively communicate my ideas, because what I was able to do with these soft skills is influence change. If I was able to hear someone say, hey, we want to go and do XYZ, and I take that same thing and explain it in a different way to an executive, I was the one that was able to make that convincing argument versus the person that told me that was doing XYZ. And as soon as I figured out that that was one of my skill sets, it changed my trajectory and path to becoming an efficient engineer, because I didn't need to only understand how everything else worked, but I knew how everything else worked and I knew how to explain it to management, right? That's what closed the gap for me to be able to rise without a college degree. And I'm a first generation Haitian American, and me being a person of color. And once was able to showcase the skill set, it actually, I was a unicorn because I never seen somebody do it like me, but also I was able to get things done because I was able to explain things effectively. So this skill set, by far, is something that I stand on, and that's why I really, pursuing the idea of doing more motivational speaking to change people's mindset, but also open up the idea that, hey, this is a skill set that will take you far beyond just engineering. Because just imagine the audience that I'll be able to impact because I'm so comfortable speaking in front of people.
This is why we started this podcast. And like I said, I knew you were a perfect fit, because this is why, and it's based on my experience as well. I didn't work in software engineering, but I worked with civil and roads engineers. And Nobody tells you at university that the people who get promoted are the ones who speak more. You always think, okay, if I graduate magna cum laude, everything's just going to be smooth sailing on my corporate career. And it doesn't work that way. And usually when it comes to the engineering sector, we always have this avatar of, we are so narrow-minded when you think about them. Oh, he's a nerd. He sits on his cubicle in programs. He talks to no one. And that needs to change because it works against them. That part, if they embrace that personality, it works against them. So what can you say to people in the industry who have decided to just think, oh, I'm an engineer, I'm just going to do this quietly?
Yeah, I mean that's a great way of describing the mindset. And I did this extremely well at Twitter, is just changing the mindset, because as engineers, we are collaborators by nature. I don't care where you work at, you cannot change something unless somebody else gives you a +1. Now, how do you convince that person to give you the +1 or the okay to change something? Is communicate to them. You either write it in code, you write it in documentation, or you speak to them about it. If you can't do any of those, then I don't know where you're going to be being an engineer at. But if you are effective at those specific skills, especially something like talking your problem out loud to get your peers to agree on it, that's extremely powerful. And that also opens up a space for you to be more open to brainstorming or newer ideas. I've used this space so many times to come up with systems and ideas that I didn't even think I was going to be able to work on. But as soon as I start to say something, someone else adds something. And before you know it, these skills will allow you to create newer things and make, bigger and giant leaps in a direction of, simplicity, or what I enjoy doing, automating myself out of a job, right? Is like, as soon as I got into those conversations and make that like the mantra, we're talking about it, and everything we do revolves around that. And because I'm able to effectively explain what that means and how it will impact their work, everybody's in line and everybody's moving in that direction. I cannot speak more about how effective speaking is in corporate America, in the field of engineering as a whole, and in our community. Like, even in our community, we find not the right opportunities, but most of the times challenging times when somebody speaks up, rather than it's like just a debate and conversation rather than an argument. Like a debate and conversation, there's going to be, a result of it. An argument is no results at all, right? It's just using this skill, speaking, motivating, and just changing people's mindset is extremely powerful. And if there's one thing that I would recommend, is definitely get into engineering, math, technology, but also develop this skill as a speaker, because your confidence in your voice, and when you're talking about something about, I don't care who, they're going to be able to move you, and you're going to be able to move them based on your voice. And that's what really comes up in terms of conversation I've had with people, is how I've been able to move them with my voice to make changes and do great things. So definitely pick up that skill set. I'm 100% behind it, and I'm hoping I'm going to be able to do it more.
I hope so too. Here's what I picked up just now based on what you said. There's a critical thinking element as well. So your boss doesn't just give you to say, here, Bobby, just program this, or just write this code. You actually have to analyze it and have some input into it as well.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what makes you a high performer, high proficient engineer, is not just executing, but understanding why you're executing it. And also understand, like, hey, if I execute this, then either it's going to allow me to do the next thing, or it's going to block me from the next things. Like, not saying anything and just following directions from a manager that's not at the keyboard has never worked well. So an engineer that's at the keyboard, speak up and let them know what's left or right, what's up or down, because most of the times they're stuck in meetings and dealing with people and stuff like that. They don't really see what's going on in the ground. And if you can't speak up for that, unfortunately, you're just, and there are going to be a lot of organizations that have the situation that you're just running around, in a circle, rather than really solving problems that can impact your customers, your service, and even your bottom line too.
Like you said, the leaders are always, they have a lot on their plate, so they need you to be able to be you initiate. You're the self-starter. You don't need to be nudged all the time to write code and just go with whatever you're being told, because that's literally the opposite of what you are when you're a leader.
Exactly. And imagine how that stunts your creativity if you're not given that space. Like, I want an engineer that could think out of the box and you give them a blank sheet of paper and you come back and they build, a massive system, right? It's like, I want that mindset, because that mindset is what's going to allow not just me, because we have to, this is also the thing. An individual is not the smartest, it's collective. All of us together is what makes us smart, right? And me, just as an individual, I can't do it on my own. I have to have other peers out there to help me sharpen my knife even more, because I don't know everything. It's collective. We have to work together. That's why I said we're collaborators by nature. Communicating effectively with your voice is extremely powerful, and definitely this is where you're able to like separate yourself from just regular employees to an outstanding high performing employee, is when you can be able to step in those type of lights.
Collaborators, another soft skill, teamwork.
Yes,
because totally. If you are I sit by myself in my cubicle and speak to no one, that's the opposite of teamwork. That is there is not a soft skill. You need to work on that. Yeah. In your experience, what have you found with some of the challenges in working as a team, in a team?
And say that again, I'm sorry.
Where, in your experience, what are some of the challenges you found when working in a team? What are some of the challenges, yes, working in a team?
I mean, first of all, you're joining a team, right? Yeah. If you're not a new member of the team, then you basically have to prove yourself as a team member. I would say I've always been in situations, unfortunately, being a Black engineer, that I've always had to be proving myself. So I got used to it. I got used to joining new teams and understanding what position everybody else plays, and really just effectively positioning myself and solving and checking that box, like, who is this person and how can they provide value? But unfortunately, being a person underrepresented, you always just looked at like, hey, they're not up to par, or so on and so forth. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges that I've had to overcome over the years, because it introduces something called imposter syndrome. It introduces an idea that, hey, I don't belong, or I don't have the capacity to understand what's going on. And I tell you, at least 90% of the time, after I became proficient, and remember, every job you ever start, there's a learning curve. That learning curve is between 3 to 6 months. No doubt about it, for you to really provide high value contributions. Once you get to that point, or once I've gotten to that point, I usually find out that I was literally the smartest person in the room at all times, and everybody else didn't know what was going on, or they were afraid to ask, or they're afraid to speak up, right? So that's why whenever I go into an environment and I'm joining a team, I always look for how much value I can provide, because I already know I have the challenges of being a person of color, but ultimately just looking for the right space to shine my brightest light. And it's usually after I become proficient, subject matter expert, and then they really find out who Bobby D is.
Yes, and now they're very privileged to be in his presence, and they can learn some wisdom from him. Yeah,
definitely.
Right. And what are some, for instance, back to social media as well, as I said earlier, I find that we really struggle with conflict resolution. If you're in a leadership position and there's always going to be conflict, or even if you're in a project team, there's always going to be conflict. What are some of the things you can share in which you can be better at conflict resolution and remember that you're working towards a bigger goal?
Yeah, first of all, saying that out loud, right? And saying that out loud in front of everybody, right? Is sometimes those spaces, especially when you're working on a team or project, I like to use spaces like that to reaffirm why and what we're doing and why we're here, right? And as long as you bring that up and everybody's there nodding their head in their agreements, then now we just have to find out, why is there friction? One thing that I've always used to reduce friction is team building events, going out of the office, finding ways for us to be outside of whatever we're normally focusing on. And what I found out is that once you find yourself in a situation where you're leaning on the people that you didn't know were there to support you, that carries right on into the office, is that you start to lean on them just the same way that experience that you had externally. Even another notch to this in terms of just conflict resolution as a team lead, because I used to lead the compute platform team on the SRE side, is that I used to take out people that I know were conflict or had conflict, and the three of us would go have lunch, go have brunch, go hang out afterwards, go have a drink, and really just trying to find the right atmosphere so that we can have all the guards down so we can really talk about it. Because what you said at the beginning is the real reason why we're here. I don't have time to deal with conflicts at this level. the system might go down tomorrow. I don't want there to be a conflict that you two can't talk to each other to bring the system back up. You know how much money we're losing by the system being down because y'all can't talk to each other? That's the reason why, as a lead, you always find ways to break those barriers, because what I want you to do is to lean on somebody that you know you can lean on at your worst and toughest time. And that's what I've used over the past to really break those challenges, especially on a team.
Mm-hmm. I know it's cliche when we say there's no I in team, but there really isn't. Even
Mm-hmm.
the leaning on someone, you don't lean on yourself, you lean on your team member.
Correct.
Everything is about the team. It's not about your feelings. Nobody's there to offend you, because we so get offended all the time. So those are the things that you constantly need to remember when working as a team, which is another soft skill.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And this is like, in terms of just why I'm so excited to be on this podcast, because you're really emphasizing these areas that a lot of people do not consider, especially engineers. And if you are a person of color trying to get in engineering, you bring these skills in, I'm telling you, you're going to shoot straight for the stars, is these soft skills and communication skills, because they're so effective. High performing engineers don't write code anymore. I'm going to say that high performing engineers don't write code anymore. They help lead teams of coders. I'm able to do that because I can effectively communicate and give direction to other coders for them to actually do that work. That's a high performer to me, and definitely these skill sets we're talking about. I don't even know. I wish somebody would have told me earlier.
Which is why we got the podcast, because nobody tells them.
Yes,
you learn all the technicalities and the subject matter expertise, but nobody tells you at university that. Actually, one of my previous guests as well, he wrote a book called The Career Toolkit. He's been hired by MIT to teach soft skills, not engineering, not software, to teach soft skills, because it is so necessary and nobody emphasizes this. The only people who learn communication at university are communication majors. Seriously, nobody teaches them. Yeah. So let's review with regards to soft skills. We've mentioned teamwork, critical thinking, being a leader, communicating. What else? Is there anything else we've left out?
I would say something that I always feel like in this space that I want to highlight as being self-aware, and more or less just being confident in yourself. And this is what kind of like helps reduce the challenges for people to open up and be effective communicators is being self-aware, just being mindful of your skills and what you can contribute to, and also understanding the space that you should be speaking in. There's some spaces that I'm like, all right, I'm listening, but then there's some spaces that, hey, I'm up next because I got to say something. And it's just you being self-aware of your skill sets and what value you bring to the table. So that's something that I would add to the list there too.
That is so key, because especially I've heard of a story where an engineer graduated magna cum laude at one of the top institutions, did not get the job at the interview because he could barely speak. Not only that, you know how they have those questions of, what are your strengths and then what are your weaknesses? You know how people answer the weakness question? I don't know if you how do you handle that one?
That one is always like, you know how you handle that one? Preparation. Think about exactly what you're going to say and talk about don't come off the cuff. Don't try to think of preparation is how you answer that question.
Because my HR friends say we get so tired of people taking the weakness and then tell a story that turns it into a strength because they don't want to look bad. And to them, it seems like you are not self-aware. Totally. Did you know that? You are not, because nobody's perfect and they're not looking for a perfect employee. But when you know your weaknesses, they know where to plug you into the organizational chart so that your strengths can contribute here, and where you have a weakness, another team member they'll put you in with will be able to fill in that gap. But most people will be like, oh yeah, I have a weakness for being too much on time and being punctual. And girl, they sit there rolling their eyes. She said to me, don't do that. And because at the interviews, where no matter how good your resume is where your communication skills really need to shine, because they're going to know what your trajectory in the company, at least have an idea where to put you in, where to plug you in, what your trajectory should be. So if you cannot speak at the interview, you're going to lose the job. If you do get the job, you are not likely to climb up the ladder because you did not show how well you can communicate. You're not self-aware. You just talk through your resume as if it's something you recited like a poem. It does not impress them. It
Yeah,
does not impress them. Yeah.
totally.
So
Yeah, I mean,
self-awareness. Yes,
that is
please.
extremely powerful in an explanation and example that you're using in terms of hiring managers looking for a candidate to fit a position. It's okay if that person doesn't have this skill, but since they got this skill, we definitely want her on our team. And that's more or less the mindset that everybody has to be ready for, especially in interviewing, because that's what I do when I interviewed for as a team lead. I don't need
Mhm.
someone else with that same exact skill. Thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate you. But that person over there that may not know how to code as highly proficient as the other person, but they know how to design systems at a very high level with reliability as a foundation and things like that. That's who we need on our team. And you have to be able to talk about your wins and your loses just the same, because that's how I evaluate you. If you tell me my lose was, hey, I flipped the coin and it landed on head, that's a loss for you. Or tell me when you brought down, like when I interview, I'll tell you when I brought down Twitter, and yeah, we learned something from it, but guess what? It never happened again. But I will tell you that so that you can see the growth and the opportunity of where that would fit in your organization. So you are totally hitting the nail on the head the way that you're describing, just talking and being effective in your ability to communicate, but self-aware and telling people the truth and just standing in it shines such a brighter light on you that you didn't even know.
And it shows integrity that you actually can tell the truth. Because if you take that, like she said, I roll my eyes the minute they start saying something and then they turn it into a strength and make themselves look good. I just said, please don't do this. We've seen it 1,000 times. Is that you are showing that I'm human, I'm here, and you are open to learning. Most people who think they're perfect are not open to learning.
Yeah, no, no, definitely, definitely. And actually, one more attribute that it shows is there's a skill that we have in the field of site reliability engineering where we do something called like a post-mortem. It's like after something goes down, why it broke, and you have to be as truthful and open as possible so that we don't make that mistake again. I've seen too many things be held back, and then when that incident happens again, we dive deeper and it was like, yo, but you didn't say that last time. Guess what? We just lost this amount of money because that happened. I need y'all to dive deeper and just open up and let us know so that we can make the system more effective. But it is so true that leaning on your interpersonal skills, soft skills, and just being yourself, and definitely just understanding the value system that you're bringing to the table by being fully aware of your failures and your gains allows us to build better and reliable systems. Everything isn't, rainbows and gold at the end of the rainbow. We know that. I want to know why it broke and tell me. Even if you typed in something wrong, I just want to know, because next time we won't let nobody type that in, right? Or we'll add some more bells and whistles to check. Like, this is such a great conversation, and I'm just so happy your audience is able to hear this feedback and definitely being mindful of their opportunity to grow and really head in the right direction of whatever path they're heading on, because these skills don't only apply to engineering. These soft skills applies to any job that I've ever had or any job that I've heard people really ascend and really become high performers in their specific skill sets.
It's a metaphor for life as well. You learn from your mistakes if you are honest about them and you do a postmortem, like you say.
Yeah. Because the one thing I hate is if we have a problem and we have that same problem again, then that's a real problem.
Who wants that? And the rest of us just sit here on our computers and like, look at this Twitter stuff. It is done for 30 seconds. What are they doing?
Or I get a phone call from my mom again. My mom's like, it doesn't load. Like, or she hears it on the news and the whole world knows about it. Man.
It was almost Armageddon when, remember the day Facebook was down? Was it down for 6 hours?
Oh,
Oh
yeah.
no, the world ended.
Oh, yeah. I
The
know.
world ended.
I sent out a tweet that I told them, I was like, because I know some of my peers also work, or just people in the industry. It's really small in terms of when you're really working at hyperscale. And I was just sending them some love, and I was like, yo, I know what it feels like to be in the mud. Nobody really understands what it means for your site to be down. Keep pushing, keep going. I know y'all fix it. Like, I just know what it feels like to be in that seat. And definitely big shout outs for them fixing and getting that problem resolved so it won't happen again. So
Mm-hmm. Big shout out to Bobby D. You show teamwork even to those outside your
Yes.
company. That's amazing. I love that.
No
Well,
doubt.
thank you so much for being here. This has been such an amazing conversation. Your story is very inspiring. And anyone who's listening, especially if they're in the industry, like you said, in any industry, they will definitely benefit from us.
Roger that. And thank you again so much to you and your audience for giving me the space. I'm really moving towards making my voice heard around the world, motivational speaking and talking about my journey in technology and engineering. And anything I can do to help support you and your community and what you're working on, just reach out and let me know. And thank you so much again for giving me this opportunity.
My pleasure. And in order to reach you, tell us where to find you.
Well, the best place is find me on Twitter.
Of course.
Bobby D underscore FL or BobbyDorlus.com. That's BOBBYDORLUS.com. It'll just send you to where my socials are at. Eventually, there'll be some other web pages up, but in general, that's where you'll be able to find me. And definitely, if you're looking for somebody to come and inspire your group of engineers, students, organization, definitely reach out because I'm always looking to uplift the next community or the next generation and my community that I'm building called the hashtag Tech Hustle. So thank you so much.
Bobby D, the Tech Hustle. Thank you very much.